Let's start with the 5 steps to write anything. So the first question is, why would anyone want to learn how to write? So most of you here study in a tech university. So if you're not an author and you are not planning to write a book, and if you're not a journalist, you're not planning to write for a newspaper, you're not a poet and you're not planning to release your work, you're not a lyricist and you're not planning to write any songs, then why would you want to learn how to write? Let me tell you why I learned how to write, or rather how I learned how to write. So when I was 5 years old, my teacher told me to give a welcome speech at the annual day sports function. So she just called me over and she gave me a slip of paper, and it had just 5 lines on it, and I was supposed to memorize it. So I went home that day and I sat and memorized the 5 lines for the whole day. And then once my dad came back from office, I put my hand behind my back and started reciting it, like looking up at the ceiling, like there's words written all over it. So a few days later, I gave the same speech in front of hundreds of students and parents at the annual day. I still recall how I felt giving that speech. Not really, because I was 5 years old, so I can't really remember everything. But I have seen the pictures, and I do realize that at that moment was when I started speaking, and it became a thing that I really love to do. And my teacher at that time, Miss Purnima, she was the one who had discovered this love and this talent before I knew they existed. And of course, I'm grateful that I had someone like her to show me that this is something I'm good at. So this was just one of the first times that I had to give a speech and speak in front of someone, come up on the stage and do this. But by the time I was 8 years old, I decided that anything I shared with anyone should always come from me. So when my teachers started calling me for giving a speech or hosting an assembly or reciting a poem, I started telling them that I would write it myself. So I would go home and write up a draft in my double line notebook, and my mom would read it and tell me how to improve it. And my dad would come home from the office and help me memorize it. And just like that, writing and sharing my thoughts with the world, it became a part of my life. So now you know how I started writing. Here's why I started writing. I started writing because it allowed me to be myself, to express myself, to stand out, to think clearly, to communicate effectively, and most important, to create opportunities for myself. And writing just it started out with a few speeches and a few essays and articles here and there. And then it evolved into writing more poems, more speeches. And at this time, I write content for other people, for clients, for brands, for companies. And that's how my writing has evolved over the years. But apart from all of this freelance writing, I also continue to write for myself. Most of it, of course, goes on social media now, which is probably why I'm here. So most of it goes on Instagram and LinkedIn. And when I look back in any sort of content I create, right from the speeches to any social media content, I think there are 5 steps that I use to write anything. So here they are, 5 steps for writing anything. So step 1, think. So the first thing that comes to my head is an experience. So something I've been through, something I felt, something I imagined, something I really liked or something I did not really like, something I saw, someone I was with, something I heard. All of these things are the first thing that come to my mind, an experience. And then I take that experience, something that probably taught me a lesson, and I use that in my writing. That's where I begin. So take this speech, for example, right? So this speech started with an experience of a 5-year-old me who was just given a slip of paper and a speech to memorize. That's how I started writing. And that's it. That's actually how I started writing this speech as well, from my experience. And writing about something that I have experienced allows me to make my writing personal, unique, and authentic. But of course, there are times when I can't rely on my experience because let's say I'm writing something for my client. In that case, it's not about my personal experience. So during those times, I create something called as a research outline. So what I do is I think of a broad topic to write about. I jot down 3 to 5 points that I would like to talk about in that topic, and I use that to create a research outline. So if you are planning to write on something that's not coming from experience, do this. Just think of a broad topic, think of a few key points you would like to include in the topic, and then you can create an outline with it. So at this point, I can even spend a few hours reading more about the topic, learning more about the topic, and even thinking more about the topic, even if I have not really experienced it. So that's the first step. Think. Now, step two, stop thinking. You see, sometimes when I start thinking, I just don't stop, right? So when I overthink, I go off on so many different tangents, and they defeat the whole purpose of thinking, of doing the first step. So when I start to overthink, this leads to two things. The first thing is that I completely lose the idea. I just go off on so many tangents, I forget where I had started in the first place. And second, that I never get around to writing the idea down because I overthink so much and I think of all these different things and I'm not sure about what to write or how to write it. So I just stop writing. So I would say don't overthink because when you overthink, you either lose the idea or worse, you just never get around to writing it. So don't overthink. Step three, write. Now, this may seem like a very odd and absurd step. Like, this is about 5 steps to writing anything. So why would I explicitly need to tell you to write? Well, because most people, including me at times, get stuck in the second step, which is overthinking. So when we get stuck there, as I said, we just don't end up writing anything. So if you want to write, it's really important that after the thinking and possibly maybe a few minutes of overthinking, you actually end up writing as well. So turn your phone off, turn all your laptop notifications off, turn off everything that's not required, keep everything aside and just start writing. Okay. I also like to do something called as turning my environment off. So when I'm writing, it usually doesn't matter if somebody's calling me, if somebody's watching TV in the same room, if somebody's talking or singing loudly in the same room, it doesn't matter. Because at that point, I am in the flow, I'm in my zone, and I like just focusing on my writing and getting things done. So if you can do that, if you can learn how to turn your environment off, that is one of the best ways to focus on your writing. Another thing is to turn off spell check. That annoying thing that just keeps marking out your mistakes while you're typing. You should turn that off. It's a distraction, so just turn it off and then keep writing. But of course, there are times when I don't really know how to convert these thoughts into words. So although I want to write, I'm not able to write because I just don't know where to start. At this point, what I'd like to do is I just like to open a Google Doc or open a new page in a book, and I just like to stare at it for a few minutes. So just stare at the cursor blinking or stare at the empty page, and I don't know, something suddenly I think happens in my brain, and everything just flows together, and it just starts making sense as to where I should start, right? And this speech also came about in that way. So I had to stare at the Google Doc for quite a bit before I could start writing the speech and understand exactly where I want to go and how I want to start. So if you don't know what to write at all, then you could just try staring at a blank document or a blank page for a bit. Don't do anything else. It's not like you just keep it open and start doing something else. No, you want to keep staring at it and see where it takes you. And once you get like even a hint of an idea and you start writing, when you keep writing for like even just 10 minutes, it'll actually get you into something called as the flow. So the flow is when you're in your own zone, when you're enjoying the process, you suddenly have a lot of ideas. And at this point, you basically forget that time exists. So you may have already experienced it, right? So sometimes you're reading a book or you're playing something and you just forget where time goes because you're just enjoying that moment so much. So if you just start writing for 10 to 15 minutes, you'll get in that flow and you'll just end up writing the whole piece without even realizing where time went. So that's step 3. Turn off all your distractions and just write. Now, step 4, read. Read your own writing. And while reading it, think how someone else would read it. So the thing is, when we write something, it comes from our perspective. And when something comes from our perspective, we have the entire complete context in our own head, but that's not the case with someone who's reading it. So while we may know the entire story, someone who's reading it doesn't. So you have to make sure that you are giving them all the important bits and pieces that they need to know to understand and to make sense of what you have written. So one way is, of course, that you can read it out loud yourself. Another way is that you can just select all the text and you can ask your laptop to read it out to you. So there's a text-to-speech feature on your laptops that you can use, and that is, of course, helpful because then you are listening. So you can just listen, and whatever seems odd, just go back and edit it. So definitely, definitely read your own writing, and this would be one reason why you should definitely complete your work well in advance so that you have time to read and so that you have time to do the final step, step 5, edit. So, editing is what shifts something from being a good piece of writing to a great piece of writing. So, you can, editing is the game changer. It is what decides how your piece of content reflects with your readers and how much even you enjoy putting it out there. The thing about editing, though, is that it requires commitment. So sometimes I spend maybe 5 or 6 hours writing a particular piece. And after that, after having just written the piece, I just do not want to look at the same document again and again and read it out loud and try to edit it. So, yes, editing does require an additional commitment to your writing. The best way I would say to not be overwhelmed by editing is to leave it for another day. So you can write today, sleep over it, and just look at your words with a fresh perspective tomorrow. Again, you can use the speech feature to just make the process easier, and you can just listen to the words and decide what needs editing. So that's the 5-step process to write anything. Think, stop thinking, write, read, and edit. But now that you know these 5 steps, I want to tell you one final thing. Writing is a skill and it is improved with practice. So, something I struggled a lot with while learning how to write was cohesion. So, it still is probably. So, until a few years ago, the major concern was that I not only struggled with creating cohesion in my writing, but I also struggled with understanding what cohesion meant and where I lacked it and how to improve it. So if I couldn't even identify my problem or the error in my writing, I couldn't understand how to fix it. So it just took me many years of writing to myself get that understanding of what cohesion really means. And now if I read a piece, I can, most of the times I can make sense that okay, this is not cohesive and this needs much more work and this needs to be pulled together in a much better way. So that's just something that happened naturally over time, because that's what practice does. Because writing is a skill and you can definitely improve it with practice. One of the best ways, of course, to improve anything is to be open to feedback. So create something, write something, publish it online, share it with your friends and family and professors, or if or just somebody you think who can help you and give you advice. And get their feedback, use their feedback, accept it, and learn from it and improve with it. Now, finally, the best way to improve your writing after practice and after getting some feedback is to read more. So, when you read more, you get ideas about how to write in the first place. And the best part of reading is that you also learn how to think. So, especially when you read something you really truly enjoy, you will find some ideas that you can relate to instantly. And relating to what you read will set you off on the very first step of the writing process, which is think. So I hope this speech has been one of those relatable things for you. And I hope this speech has got you started on the first step of the writing process, think.